in Ellicott City, Maryland, and he's the founder of Worthy Ministries. He lived in southern Israel for 19 years, where he met his wife. Let me tell you, this is a very knowledgeable man. He's really on top of things. He knows what's going on in Israel. He knows what's going on in the world. Ladies and gentlemen, Reverend George Whitten.
Amen. Amen. Man, I love being here. I love seeing so many people supporting Israel. My wife and I have been redeployed here because of COVID. We can't necessarily get back. And so we have been going all over the country, speaking life and revival and the love for the Jewish people. About 2,000 years ago, there was a very interesting event that takes place. Jesus is standing on the Mount of Olives. And on the Mount of Olives, just before his death, he gives a discourse. In the very beginning of that discourse, he says, "Do not be deceived." The irony is that just a few days later, there was a young man sitting at a table right with Jesus, and a spirit of deception entered into him. And he went to a hill just outside of Jerusalem, in a town which was now known as Tapiot. And at Tapiot, he meets with the Sanhedrin council. The Sanhedrin council convince him to betray Jesus. They give him 30 pieces of silver. And so Judas goes from there and goes to the Garden of Gethsemane, betrays Jesus. That hill is called the Hill of Evil Counsel. The Hill of Evil Counsel today is where the UN headquarters is located. Now, to understand what's happening, when the UN formed its Human Rights Committee, from its creation from 2006 to 2016, there were over 135 resolutions. 68 of those resolutions were against Israel. The United Nations General Assembly from 2012 to 2015, there were 97 resolutions. 83 targeted Israel. In the current session of the United Nations, there were 23 resolutions that were issued, one issuing for Iran, Syria, North Korea, Myanmar, Crimea, and the United States for its embargo on Cuba. 17 of those resolutions were toward Israel. Do not be deceived. The United Nations is not for Israel.
That's right. That's right.
Do not be deceived. The media today does not live by the ninth commandment. The ninth commandment is thou shalt not bear false witness. I see it firsthand. I will give you a story. A few years ago, there was a terrorist that was going through Jerusalem stabbing people. The headline was, the Jewish people surrounded him yelling, "Die, die." You have to understand that die in the Hebrew is enough. My wife, when we first came to the United States and we were doing a speaking tour, we were in a little room. My daughter was acting up. And my wife said to my daughter, "Die." You wouldn't believe what that Sunday school teacher looked like. So you have to understand there is deception in the media. Last Sunday, there was a a protester you read in the newspapers. The protester was approaching the lines, and this terrorist had a grenade in his hand. He was a Hamas member, was shot and died 4 days later. The media reported that this was a protester that died. This was a terrorist. He was covered with a Hamas flag. He was dedicated as I'm trying to think how they describe it. A Palestinian militant described as a heroic martyr. So we are sitting here, and we have to understand, do not be deceived by the media. Do not be deceived that the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement, or what you would know in the newspapers, the BDS, is for the Palestinian people. In 2014, there was a company called SodaStream that had Scarlett Johansson is on her on a commercial. It brought a lot of people to understand certain things, and all of a sudden the movement went against SodaStream because SodaStream had a factory inside of the West Bank. That factory employed over 500 Palestinians. Because of the movement, and they brought so much pressure, yes, SodaStream did move its factory. It moved it right outside near where I live in Arad, in a little town called Rehat. It is a Bedouin town. It now is employing Bedouins. It was employing Palestinians. Do not be deceived. The BDS movement is not for the Palestinian people.
That's right.
Do not be deceived when you hear that Israel is an apartheid state. I live in the town of Arad. If you forget it, we're between a rod and a hard place. This town of Arad, we are surrounded by 120,000 Bedouins. They are Muslims. There is not one checkpoint in any of those towns. Those Muslims come to our town to do most of their commerce, because it's our town that they receive their welfare checks. It's our town so in my town, I see Muslims every day. They have freedom of movement. Where you see the security fence in Israel is to prevent terrorists from killing innocent people.
That's right.
As long as the Bedouins continue to live in peace, there won't be no checkpoints, because Israel is not about trying to discriminate against anyone.
That's right.
So do not be deceived that Israel discriminates against Palestinians.
Right.
We often hear that in this last war, there was a situation. In the situation, there was 234 people that died in this last conflict with Hamas in Gaza. What you won't find out is that 112 of those were active terrorists. Over half of the people that were targeted, because Israel lives by a certain code. Rules of engagement, ROEs, rules of engagement. I know from personal firsthand experience, because I've been a pastor in Israel for 19 years, I will give you two stories. There was one young man that went to the IDF, and he came to the IDF and said, and they were questioning him, and they asked him a certain question, and he said, yeah, I can't wait to kill Arabs. Thinking that this young man was going to be part of the special forces, thinking that he was going to become someone special in the IDF, that's what they were looking for. That young man became a chef. He didn't have a gun. There's a young man in my congregation that when he went to the military, they asked him specifically, if a Palestinian came up to you and slapped you, what would you do? Nothing. I turned the other cheek. They said, well, what if they got up in your face and they were threatening? Would you kill them? Oh, I couldn't kill anyone. He was such a pacifist. You know what the Israeli army made him? A sharpshooter. Why? Because they have to be very careful about when they take a shot, it is a shot against a terrorist.
Yeah. That's good.
Do not be deceived. God is not mocked, for whatever a man sows, he will also reap. So today we stand with Israel, and we sow seeds of truth into the Middle East. But do not be deceived. You cannot have peace in the Middle East in the midst of lies. We sow seeds of peace into the Middle East, but do not be deceived. We cannot have peace with those that sow seeds seeking death and destruction. We sow love into the Middle East, but do not be deceived in believing that Islam loves democracy.
That's right.
Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East. And do not be deceived. One cannot say that they love Jesus and hate the Jewish people.
Come on. That's right.
God bless you. And thank you for standing for the Jewish people and for the nation of Israel. Let's continue to pay for the peace of Jerusalem. God bless you. God bless Israel. And God bless America.